sometimes your opinions are polarizing to some and get like viral and popular on Twitter and other social media. Why do you think sometimes like what you think about certain sports topics can be so polarizing?
Well, like in the sports opinions business, in fact, it pays to have kind of like your hot takes, your so-called hot takes are counterintuitive conclusions, right? Those are the interesting ones, because if it's just the thing that everybody knows, who cares? If you do some real analysis, most of the time, what everyone thinks is right. There's a consensus for a reason, but sometimes it's not. And you can come to a conclusion that's counterintuitive, right? It doesn't feel right. It's not the orthodoxy anyway. And so when you have those conclusions, on television especially, when you lead with that, when you lead with your counterintuitive conclusion, people are like, wait, what the hell is he talking about? And then TV is not a medium where you can really, you're not supposed to expound for, 10 straight minutes. It's supposed to be about 90 seconds if it's done right. So, here's my counterintuitive conclusion. That takes 15, 20 seconds. You have maybe a minute left to explain how you got there. And that will convince some people. It'll get them to say, wow, that's interesting. But most will probably say, no, I'm still not convinced. You're not going to convince them in 90 seconds. And so they have a strong reaction to what you just said, and that's the name of the game.
How are you able to get started and rise up in the industry? And do you have any advice for prospective young media people, especially in this environment?
I don't think there's really a traditional way. At least I didn't experience a traditional kind of like journey in the business, right? Ascendancy in the business. I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't know I was going to do it for a living necessarily, permanently. But I had a public access show when I was in high school, and I got noticed for it. And when I was graduating college, I just kept on doing the public access show. When I graduated college, I sent out a demo reel basically to a bunch of places, and ESPN happened to be starting a new boxing show, and they were looking for a studio analyst, and they chose me. So that was really my first real job out of college, was on ESPN as the boxing studio analyst. And from there, I did like a good 5 minutes on PTI as a boxing guy, and they said, hey, can you talk other sports? And I said, yes. And so they had me guest host PTI with Dan Levitard for a week, and then they were starting a new show called Around the Horn. And they made me the host of that show. And so that's how I got it, crossed from boxing into general sports. Advice to people in the industry, I would say that sports, the mistake I think a lot of people make is they think that they're going into the sports business, but you're not. You're not going into the sports business. You're going into, you have to think like sports is the software program you're running. It's the app that you're running, right? But you're really, the question that really people want to know is, do you have the hardware? Because if your CPU is powerful enough, it doesn't matter what program you run, sports or news or whatever, right? And so my advice to people in the industry who want to get into the industry, either opining or reporting or whatever, the best thing you can do is learn how to really write well. Because if you can really write well, you can think well, and that's what it's all about.
Do you have a most satisfying moment in your professional career, like this one achievement that you're really proud of you were able to do?
A most satisfying moment, I loved when I first was on HBO. The first time you do anything, the first time I was on Friday Night Fights on ESPN2, hey, look at this on national TV. That was great. The first time I was on HBO, because I grew up watching HBO boxing, that was great. When I was, I hosted CNN in prime time, when I was thinking about going into news, and that was really interesting. And there've been a lot of first moments like that. But I wouldn't say here is my proudest moment in broadcasting. I wouldn't know what that is.
Moving on to a little boxing, who would you have winning a Crawford-Spinks fight and why?
That's as close a fight as you can get. That's a 50-50 kind of fight. I liked Crawford by like 51-49, but Spence is so active. He's so active that Crawford's going to have to counter with something that really changes the fight, because you would think he'd be outworked. And Spence also is a responsible defender and all that, and he can punch. So it's it's certainly the best fight that can be made in boxing, like by far. And fights like this almost never actually happen, like where you have two undefeated fighters in their prime, in their best weight division, who are both boxer punchers with a well-rounded skill set offensively and defensively, where the winner of the fight would certainly be universally recognized as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. It almost never happens.
Yeah, I feel like this could be an anomaly. And do you think that Spence's activity could possibly bait Crawford into making a mistake because he is so active?
No, I don't. I see it more like the danger for Crawford is he's always able to adjust to the other guy and change the fight as it goes on. But if he is not able to put something on Spence, then he's going to have to be more of the guy who we saw in against Bradis Prescott originally. He was a very, very good boxer puncher as a lightweight, and he's more of a puncher boxer as a welterweight. So if he can't, like, the danger in being a puncher boxer against the guy as active as Spence, also with a really good defense, is that if you tend to wait a little longer and to take more shots. And so then now you're relying on changing the fight with something big. But if you can't do that, now you're behind in the fight, right? And you've taken punishment. So Crawford may be best off going back to the lightweight Crawford, who is more of a boxer puncher, emphasis on the boxer.
What do you think is next for Teofimo Lopez, and what do you think his ceiling is?
I think Teofimo is one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, top 5 or 10. It looks like he may have a fight in Australia coming up. He's talked about wanting the Ramirez-Taylor winner at 40. I think that's a great fight, against either guy.
When do you think we could see a possible Lomachenko rematch?
I don't know if you are going to see a Lomachenko rematch. Lomachenko's really a 130 pounder fighting at 135, and Teo's a 140 pounder who is fighting at 135. So I think Teo's going to 40 and he ain't going back, and he doesn't seem anxious to give Lomachenko a rematch.
It was more decisive than most thought.
Yeah, I thought possible range of scores are 6-6 to 8-4 Teo. So, in fact, if you get a majority decision, that's about right. The scores could be 6-6, 7-5, 8-4, and that's what most people had.
Do you have any thoughts on the Tyson Jones card?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was the best version of what that could have been. No one got hurt. If you squinted, it looked like Mike Tyson. Roy early on looked like he was just going to be overwhelmed. And right around the fourth round, you could see in the corner, he was really breathing heavily and his body was hurting, obviously. And he was like, no, I'm not going out like this. And he willed himself into the fight and made it entertaining and competitive. And he even took some hooks upstairs, a couple of big hooks upstairs from Tyson. And that was the whole danger. Oh, my God, what happens when Roy gets caught? And he took him really well. I think it was the best, and I was entertained. I thought it was the best version of what it might have been.
Do you think that the referee gave Nate Robinson a bit too much leeway after the knockdowns? Because championship fighters have not gotten as much benefit of the doubt in history.
Well, first of all, Nate did get caught with a rabbit punch, really. I mean, it wasn't an intentional rabbit punch, but when the broadcasters were saying, oh, it was a legal punch, no, it clearly wasn't. It caught him behind the ear on the back of the head, But it was not. It's not like Jake Paul was being dirty. It was just, one of those things. Nate was turning, it's awkward. He's a novice. But a great athlete in against a real boxer, and whatever you want to say about Jake Paul, he's dedicated himself to boxing for a couple of years now. A great athlete against a guy with better muscle memory will have moments where it looks like, oh, maybe he can do something. Muscle memory is going to win. The guy with the skills is going to win. And Jake is developing boxing skills. Nate is just a guy who's athletic, who thinks he can fight. And I'm sure can in like a fight against a non-boxer, but not against the guy who boxes.
Did you think that the Tyson Jones card was good or bad for boxing?
I don't know. I'm more interested in, do I think it was good or bad for me as a consumer? I like watching Mike Tyson in the ring matched appropriately. And it's surreal. He's 54. Like, Muhammad Ali was 54. Let me think about this. In 1995, could you imagine if in 1995 Ali were able to fight an exhibition and actually kind of look like himself?
Yeah, 1995, Ali was a mess.
Hey, it would be amazing. And Mike, who I never thought would get to this age, and neither did he, is not only 54, but is thriving at 54. Made and lost a fortune, did bad things in his life, tragically lost a kid, been through so much, and here he is having a second or third act in American life that is productive and interesting. And he's even back in the ring, got himself in shape. He has a little almost like the Rocky Balboa movie, right? He has something to give still, you know?
Yeah.
And as long as he's matched with small, old guys like Roy, I'd watch it again. I'd watch Mike fight again.
I thought it was good as well. And Mike Tyson, to me, is one of the most valuable pieces of Americana we've had in the last quarter century, half century.
Yeah, he's look, they moved 1.6 million pay-per-views at $50 a pop. That's more business than Golovkin and Canelo did.
Yeah. Well, as a boxing purist, that might be a little like saddening, but still, you know, it's good that more people are viewing the sport and might get interested in it.
Well, first of all, the undercard had a couple of good fights on it.
Yeah, with Badu Jack.
Yeah, there were actual fights, and they weren't bad. But like, it's like when Logan Paul and KMI fought. Everyone was complaining. I thought, hold on a second. These dudes got 1 million people interested enough to buy their fight, right? How does that hurt boxing? A lot of these fighters that are, you know, what boxers are not just competing against each other. The two of them in a fight are competing against every other entertainment possibility in the world at that moment, right? So to be a professional fighter plying your trade is great and honorable. And for those interested in the craft of boxing, you know, it will appeal to them and you can market it to them. But there aren't as many of those people as there are just regular people who want to be entertained and are looking for drama, you know. So stories, which is how we understand the world, are only as interesting as their characters. And if you don't know who the characters are, then there's nothing at stake, really, and you're not as interested in the story. People know the character of Mike Tyson, and far fewer people know the character of a lot of current fighters, you know. And Logan Paul or whoever else it is, they introduced a big audience to the character of them, and then were willing to get in the ring. And if they generate big business, I don't hold it against them. Good for them. And some of the fighters on their undercards, by the way, raised their profile with the general public as a result.
Do you have a favorite boxing match of all time?
I love Leonard Hearns 1. I love the Thrilla in Manila. I mean, Thrilla in Manila is so brutal, it's almost hard to watch.
Yeah, that fight would have been stopped today.
I love Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Corrales Castillo is like my favorite action fight prior.
Yeah, those are warriors.
There are so many of them, you know. Boxing history has so much, very rich history. So it depends. Are you talking about, like, I think the fight where I thought those two were both at the top of their game, were both kind of unbeatable in their way, and fought for all the marbles. Leonard Hearns won. That was like the highest level of boxing. Like, Sugar Ray Robinson was too much for the welterweights. By the time he got to middleweight, he was no longer at his best. Muhammad Ali also, by the time he fought his greatest opponents, was no longer at his best. When he fought Liston really was not a match for him. So so you start with the greatest fighters ever, and then you think, what were their greatest fights, right? There's no footage of. Henry Armstrong's fights are a lot of fun to watch, but I did not live through that era, Yeah. Sam Langford, Mickey Walker, Benny Leonard. So you get to like Roberto Duran. I loved the third fight against De Jesus was a masterful performance by Duran. There's so many. Purnell, I mentioned Chavez. I love Chavez Rosario. Like, I love fights that are classic examples that are like archetypical fights. So Chavez Rosario. Here's the nonstop pressure fighter versus the boxer puncher with the big right hand. And the pressure fighter has to get through the danger zone of that right hand in order to get inside, and then has to work him once he gets inside. That is a great example of that kind of fight. To a much lesser extent, recently, Beterbiev versus Wojcik was like that, right? So so I loved Tony Girov, because that was an example of one guy just wants you to come at him so he can stand there and counter, and the other guy wants you to stand right there so he can come at you. So it's fastball pitcher versus fastball hitter. One strength plays into the other. And now who's better at their thing? And when you're watching a fight like that, if the story of the fight is unclear at first, and it was to me with Tony Girov, I'm like, wait, who's winning this? What's the story? Is the young guy breaking down the old guy slowly, or is the old guy schooling the young guy slowly? And it turned out the old guy was breaking down the young guy slowly. So
those blueprint fights.
Exactly. The classic fights. The game of chess is like that too. You can find classic examples of, here is a game that shows you what happens when. So Chavez Rosario's one type of fight like that. Girov Tony's a fight like that. And so those kind of fights I really like a lot, that you can use as reference points.
Like if you want to show someone like what boxing is, like a perfect example, those types of cookie cutter fights.
Yep. This is the I know what you mean by cookie cutter, but I mean more like, here's the perfect example of it. Here's the classic example of it. So and Corrales Castillo was the greatest action fight I'd ever seen. And I saw it live. I went to Vegas on my own dime just to be there as a fan. I knew it was going to be great, but I didn't know it would be that.
Do you think that the NBA season is ready to start with COVID surge, or should there be talks of like a second larger bubble?
Well, the good news is that there's a vaccine. The bad news is that incompetence at the highest level of our federal government turned down 100 million extra doses of the vaccine. So the vaccine, you need 2 doses per person to inoculate. There are, so 100 million doses takes care of 50 million people.
300
million. We have 100 million doses. We have 100 million from Pfizer. They were willing to give us next quarter's 100 million now, but because the Trump White House turned it down, those are now going to other countries, and we have to wait until the following June to get the next 100 million. Otherwise, you need 70 to 75% to achieve herd immunity, so we can get back to normal. The population in the United States is 330 million, which means we need to give 2 doses to approximately 250 million people, right? So you need about 500 million doses. We have 100 million. We have 20%. We could have had 200 million. That's 40% of the doses that we need. And Pfizer's not the only company. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and things are going to get better. And the danger right now is that we also have competence at the highest level of the government instead of a complete mess. And so the danger now is that people let their guard down, and it gets worse before it gets better. So that's a long way of saying the NBA needs to be careful, but there's reason to think that they can be. And they just showed that they know, their judgment should be trusted. They pulled off the best, sporting year of any of the major sports.
I agree. Do you think that if there was a bigger bubble, possibly in California, since I heard some of the teams might not be able to leave the state as much for away games, that might drain on the players' mental health as it did in Disneyland?
The NBA players are asked, a lot is being asked of them, and a lot of it was just asked of them. On the other hand, they're getting all their local TV money. The league is they have a good partnership in terms of cooperation between the players and the owners. It seems to be working, and I would trust that they're going to be able to work it out based on what I just saw.
Do you have any thoughts on perhaps the most big-ticket name in the recent draft, LaMelo Ball? We've seen him on national TV sometimes in high school. What do you think his ceiling is for his first year in Charlotte next to Gordon Hayward?
LaMelo does a lot of things really well, but all the Ball kids' shots look broken, and that's what worries me, because it doesn't mean you can't be a valuable player. But name any non-big who can't shoot, or even the bigs who can't shoot, who's an elite player, who's an MVP caliber player. There's no more Shaquille O'Neal. Yeah, and Ben Simmons actually, in order to become an MVP player, needs to shoot. He is a great player, but in order to become an MVP, if Ben Simmons could shoot, we'd probably pick him to get out of the East, but he can't. Even if he could just shoot like the Greek Freak, we would pick him to get out of the East, but he can't even do that. So that's what worries me about LaMelo. I don't want to harp on what he can't do and ignore what he can do, but it's a big thing.
Do you have any predictions or hot takes for the upcoming NBA season that starts on Christmas?
If Porzingis can stay healthy, the Mavs are going to be a problem.
I agree. Who do you think is going to come out of the East this year?
Well, let's see what happens with these moves. If I were the Bucks, I'd be looking for a way to grab James Harden right now and put him with Giannis. Celtics aren't going to do anything. The Nets, I'm suspicious of KD's ability to get back to what he was, and Kyrie is just a mess. I like the Sixers a lot. I like what Daryl Morey's done a whole lot, and he's not done, I'm sure. And then Milwaukee, I'm tempted to say Milwaukee, but I've already seen this where Giannis really doesn't have a crime partner who's,
Chris Middleton is not that guy.
No, and a great big, which is really what Giannis is. He looks like a wing at times, but he's really a big, because when it gets tight, he plays up, he plays in terms of his size. When a guy like that is around, he needs a guy who's not a big, who's just about as good as him in order to win. Like Kareem needed Oscar Robertson and Magic Johnson. He had 1 with Robertson, 6 with Magic, 0 with anyone else. Shaq had Penny, was not enough. Penny was not enough in his prime. Shaq needed Kobe and Wade in their primes. That's the only time he won championships. Just point to any Anthony Davis. You said, well, now Giannis has Drew Holiday. AD had Drew Holiday, couldn't get anything done. He needed LeBron
Holiday and Rondo.
So it's they have more this team has more shooting than that team did. If they don't have a Harden paired with Giannis, would have me believe. But Middleton and Drew Holiday is not enough with Giannis. Even if they would, if the deal for Bogdanovich would have gone through, that's really good, right? Holiday, Middleton, Bogdanovich, Giannis, and Brook Lopez. That's a really well-made team. But I don't see anyone there other than Giannis who is really going to strike fear into people. So I really think they need to upgrade the Bucks, but they may not be able to.
Yeah, I feel like the Miami Heat are one piece away. If they could somehow shoehorn in James Harden, that they would be a title contender.
No, Harden's not a Riley type player. I would say about the Heat, if Tyler Hero continues to progress, that's their answer.
Yeah, he needs to develop into like an all-star.
Right. I think he will.
Do you have a favorite Stephen A. Smith story? Like one that might have been funny or just memorable in general, knowing how animated he is?
A favorite story. Yeah, but I can't repeat it.
All right. I really appreciate your time, Max. It was
no problem.
It's a really good opportunity, and you're one of my idols, you know, growing up. Like I wanted to be like him.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you really showed me that like a guy from the Bronx in New York could do it, and then it was very inspiring.
I'm glad to hear it, man. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for your time.
Not at all, Hunter. We'll stay in touch.
All right, definitely. Goodbye.
All right, brother.